On a cold autumn night, the small town of San Miguel was silent, its cobblestone streets glistening under the dim light of the old lanterns. The town's church, St. Mary of the Angels, stood tall in the heart of the square. Its wooden doors were closed, the faint sound of bells still echoing from the evening mass. Father Antonio, the parish priest, was preparing to retire to his quarters when he heard something unusual. A faint, fragile cry, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. At first he thought it was a cat or the echo of children playing in the distance. But then the cry grew louder, trembling with desperation. With his lantern in hand, he rushed to the entrance. And there, lying on the stone steps of the church, was a newborn baby girl. She was wrapped in a thin, worn-out blanket, her tiny fists trembling against the night air. Her face was red from crying, her breaths shallow. Father Antonio froze, his heart pounding. He looked around the empty square, hoping someone would emerge from the shadows, claiming her, explaining it was all a mistake. But no one came. The priest knelt and carefully lifted the infant into his arms. The blanket was damp, as though she had been left there for a while. He whispered softly, trying to soothe her, but inside his soul was trembling. Who could abandon a child like this? That night he called the sisters from the convent nearby, asking them to care for the baby until the authorities arrived. Sister Clara, the eldest, held the child close and murmured, "This is no accident, Father. She has been placed here under the protection of God." The following days were filled with questions. No note had been left, no sign of who the parents were. The authorities conducted their search but found nothing. The baby girl was given the temporary name Esperanza, meaning hope, chosen by the sisters because they believed her life carried a greater purpose. News spread quickly through San Miguel. Some people whispered that it was a tragedy, others said it was a blessing. Many villagers left small gifts at the convent, baby clothes, bottles of milk, tiny shoes, as if together they were welcoming her into the world. Yet, beneath the kindness, a shadow lingered. Why had her parents abandoned her? Would she ever know her true origins? Father Antonio struggled with these questions every night as he prayed in front of the altar. One evening, he stood before the flickering candles, the baby cradled in his arms, and whispered a blessing over her. "May you never feel unloved. May you always walk in the light, no matter the darkness of your beginning." After a few weeks, the social workers arrived. They explained the baby would be moved to an orphanage in the city, where she might one day be adopted. Father Antonio handed her over with a heavy heart, placing a small silver cross around her neck, a gift from the church. "May this always remind you where you began," he said, his voice breaking. As the car drove away, taking little Esperanza toward an unknown future, Father Antonio stood at the church steps, staring into the distance. The echo of her cries still lingered in his ears. He knew he might never see her again, but deep down, he believed that God had written a path for her that would one day lead her back. Because sometimes, the place where a story begins is also the place where it ends. Do you believe it was destiny that this baby was left at the church doors? What would you have done if you had found her crying there? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss the rest of this incredible journey. Years passed, and little Esperanza's journey continued far from the cobblestone streets of San Miguel. After a few months in the city orphanage, she was adopted by a couple who had been praying for a child for years, Miguel and Ana Torres. They lived in a modest home in the neighboring town of Santa Lucia, known for its colorful markets and warm community spirit. When they first saw her, only a few months old, wrapped in the same silver cross that Father Antonio had given her, Ana felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "She's perfect," she whispered, holding the baby to her chest. Miguel nodded, his voice trembling as he said, "She's ours." From that day forward, Esperanza's life was filled with the kind of love every child deserves. Ana sewed her dresses by hand, embroidering small flowers on the hems, while Miguel would rock her to sleep after long days at work. She grew up in a home that, though simple, overflowed with warmth. As a child, Esperanza was lively and curious. She loved following Ana to the market where the smell of roasted corn and fresh bread filled the air. Everyone in Santa Lucia adored her bright smile, and the way she would wave at strangers, her little silver cross gleaming on her chest. But even in the midst of love, questions occasionally lingered. One evening, when Esperanza was about 7 years old, she overheard two women at the market whispering, "That's the girl who was abandoned at the church in San Miguel, isn't she?" One of them said softly, "Yes, poor thing. At least she was adopted by a good family." Esperanza froze. The words stung, though she didn't fully understand them. That night at home, she looked at Ana with wide eyes and asked, "Mama, what does it mean that I was abandoned?" Ana's hands trembled. She had hoped to wait until Esperanza was older before explaining, but she knew the truth couldn't be hidden forever. She knelt down, holding her daughter's face gently. "My love," she said softly, "you were found at the doors of a church when you were just a baby. Nobody knows who your first parents were. But God brought you to us, and from the moment we saw you, you became our daughter. Nothing will ever change that." Esperanza nodded, but her young heart struggled with the revelation. For days she avoided questions, but sometimes at night, she would hold her silver cross tightly and whisper, "Who are you, Mama? Who are you, Papa?" Despite these doubts, she thrived. At school she excelled in her studies, often praised for her determination. Ana and Miguel encouraged her to dream big, reminding her that she could be whatever she wanted. But the seed of mystery about her origins had already taken root in her heart. As she entered her teenage years, the questions grew louder. She often gazed at her reflection, wondering if her brown eyes and long dark hair resembled those of her unknown parents. At times, she felt torn, grateful for the life she had, but restless about the unanswered questions of her past. One evening, after a heated argument with Miguel about curfew, Esperanza shouted, "You're not even my real father." The words left her lips before she could stop them. The room went silent. Miguel's face fell, but he didn't respond in anger. Instead, he quietly walked away. Esperanza cried herself to sleep that night, ashamed of what she had said. The next morning, she found Miguel sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. Without looking up, he whispered, "Esperanza, blood doesn't make someone a father. Love does. And I have loved you every day since you came into our lives." Those words stayed with her, a reminder of the family she had been blessed with. Yet, deep down, the unanswered question still tugged at her soul. She didn't yet know it, but the desire to discover her origins would one day lead her back to the very place where her life began. By the time Esperanza reached adulthood, she had blossomed into a strong and determined young woman. She studied social work at the university in the capital, driven by a deep desire to help children who faced abandonment, just as she once had. To her classmates, she seemed confident and full of purpose. But inside, a part of her still felt incomplete. Every time she wore her silver cross, memories resurfaced. The whispers at the market, Ana's gentle explanation, Miguel's words of love. She was grateful beyond measure for her adoptive parents, but the unanswered questions weighed heavier as she grew older. Who had left her at the church steps? Why had they done it? Were they still alive? On her 21st birthday, Ana and Miguel surprised her with a simple dinner at home. After the cake was served, Ana handed her a small envelope. "We think you're ready," she said softly. Inside, Esperanza found old documents from the orphanage, official papers describing the day she was found in San Miguel, signed by Father Antonio himself. Her heart pounded as she read the yellowed pages. It was the first tangible link to her beginnings. "Mama, Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I think I need to go back. I need to see where it all started." Miguel reached across the table, taking her hand. His eyes were moist, but his voice was steady. "If that is what your heart tells you, we will support you. Just remember, no matter what you find, you are not alone." With their blessing, Esperanza began her search. She contacted the orphanage, only to learn that most of the records from that time had been lost in a fire years ago. The disappointment was crushing. She reached out to local officials in San Miguel, but they had no answers either. Many of the people who had lived there when she was a baby had moved away or passed on. Still, she refused to give up. She traveled to San Miguel for the first time since infancy. The town looked like something from a forgotten dream. Colorful houses with cracked walls, children playing in the square, the smell of fresh tortillas in the air. And in the center, towering just as it always had, stood Saint Mary of the Angels. As she walked toward the church, her steps slowed. A wave of emotions surged within her: fear, hope, sorrow, anticipation. She reached out and touched the heavy wooden doors, wondering if these were the same doors her tiny body had once lain against. Inside, the church was quiet. Candles flickered near the altar, and the faint scent of incense lingered. An elderly priest noticed her hesitation and approached. "Welcome, my child," he said gently. "Are you visiting San Miguel?" Esperanza swallowed hard. I was born here, or rather, I was left here, at these very doors, many years ago." The priest's eyes widened. He introduced himself as Father Luis, the successor of Father Antonio, who had passed away years earlier. "Ah," he whispered, "you must be the baby he always spoke about, Esperanza." Hearing her name spoken in that way sent chills down her spine. "He remembered me?" she asked. "Every day," Father Luis said softly. "He carried the memory of that night until his last breath. He believed that God had a plan for you." Though the conversation comforted her, it also left her with more questions. No one knew who had left her there or why. The trail seemed to end once again at the church steps. That night, Esperanza sat on a bench outside the church, staring at the stars. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Why won't the answers come? Who am I, really?" But just as she was about to give in to despair, Father Luis approached with something in his hands. A worn leather journal. "This belonged to Father Antonio," he explained. "He kept many notes about his years here. Perhaps it holds something that can help you." Esperanza clutched the journal, her heart racing. She didn't yet know it, but within those fragile pages lay the first real clue that would push her deeper into the mystery of her origins, and closer to a revelation she never imagined. Esperanza spent that night in the small guest room of the convent, the old leather journal resting on the wooden desk beside her bed. She could hardly sleep. Each time she closed her eyes, she wondered if those pages might finally hold the truth she had been searching for her entire life. At dawn, with trembling hands, she opened the cover. The handwriting inside was delicate, almost fragile, the ink faded with time. The first pages were filled with prayers, sermons, and reflections about the townspeople of San Miguel. But as she turned further, her breath caught. One entry was dated the very night she was found. "Tonight the Lord placed a miracle at our doors, a newborn child abandoned but alive. I do not know who left her nor why, but I feel strongly this was no accident. I shall call her Esperanza, for she is hope itself." Esperanza's heart raced as she read the words. Father Antonio had seen her not as a tragedy but as a blessing. Tears welled in her eyes. But there was more. 2 weeks later, another entry. A woman came to the church, cloaked and trembling. She prayed for forgiveness at the altar, her hands shaking. I felt in my heart she was connected to the child, though she said nothing. She carried the scent of wild jasmine. Esperanza gasped. Could this woman have been her mother? The entry gave no name, no details, only that fleeting description. Still, it was the first concrete clue she had ever found. Determined, she carried the journal to Father Luis. "Do you know who this woman could have been?" she asked. He frowned, thinking deeply. Wild jasmine. In those years I remember a young woman named Isabella, who often wore jasmine flowers in her hair. But she disappeared suddenly and no one knew why. The name sent shivers through Esperanza. For the first time, she had a possible link to her bloodline. She began searching for records of Isabella in the town archives, but they were sparse. A baptism record here, a note of her working at the local bakery there. And then, nothing. It was as if she had vanished. The townspeople had vague memories. An older woman at the market told Esperanza, "Yes, I remember Isabella. She was quiet, always with flowers. But one day she was simply gone. Some said she went to the city. Others whispered she was forced to leave." The whispers deepened Esperanza's resolve. Why had Isabella disappeared right after the night of her abandonment? One evening, Exhausted but determined, she sat once more with Father Antonio's journal. Near the back she found a final entry that struck her like lightning. "I fear for the mother of the child." She came once more, leaving in silence but weeping. I wished to ask her why, but she vanished before I could speak. I pray she finds peace. One day the girl will return and the truth will be revealed. Esperanza's hands trembled. The girl, she was the one Father Antonio had written about. He had believed her return was inevitable, that destiny itself would lead her back. The next morning she stood before the church again, her heart pounding. She realized that her search was no longer just about facts. It was about faith, about trusting that the answers would reveal themselves when the time was right. But just as she prepared to leave the town, a man approached her. He was elderly, his face weathered by the sun, his eyes sharp with recognition. "You," he whispered. "You look just like her. You must be Isabella's daughter." Esperanza froze, her pulse quickening. This stranger's words confirmed what her heart had long suspected. Finally, a living person who could connect her to the woman who might have been her mother. She stared at him, her voice trembling. "Please, tell me everything you know about Isabella." The man sighed heavily as if carrying a burden for decades. "Child, there are things you may not be ready to hear. But if you truly want the truth, follow me." Esperanza took a deep breath, clutching her silver cross. She had come too far to turn back now. Whatever lay ahead, she was ready. Esperanza followed the old man through the narrow streets of San Miguel, her heart pounding with every step. They walked past faded murals, empty courtyards, and small houses with red clay roofs until they reached a modest home at the edge of town. The man paused at the doorway, his hand trembling as he pushed it open. Inside, the air smelled faintly of dust and dried flowers. On the wall hung a faded photograph of a young woman with long dark hair and a crown of jasmine blossoms. Esperanza gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The resemblance was undeniable. "That is Isabella," the man said softly. "My sister." Esperanza's legs nearly gave out beneath her. "My mother?" she whispered. The man nodded. "Yes. She was your mother." Tears streamed down Esperanza's face as she stepped closer to the photograph, her heart breaking and swelling at the same time. "What happened to her? Why did she leave me?" The man, whose name was Raphael, sighed deeply, his eyes clouded with sorrow. Isabella was young, barely 18 when she became pregnant. The father was a man who promised her love but abandoned her when he learned of the child. In those days, the shame of raising a child alone was unbearable. Our parents forced her to hide the pregnancy, fearing disgrace. Esperanza's chest tightened. She imagined her mother, terrified and alone, carrying a baby she could not keep. "When you were born," Raphael continued, his voice breaking, "Isabella wanted to keep you. She begged. But our parents were strict, unyielding. They feared scandal, rejection by the community. One night she made the hardest choice of her life. She left you at the church doors, believing that God would protect you, that someone kind would take you in." Esperanza sobbed, clutching the silver cross at her neck. The story echoed Father Antonio's words from years ago, that her abandonment was not an accident, but part of something greater. "But where is she now?" Esperanza asked desperately. Raphael lowered his head. "Isabella never recovered from the pain of losing you. She moved to the city hoping for a new beginning, but her health declined. She passed away when she was only 35. The words cut like a knife. Esperanza sank into a chair, grief overwhelming her. She had dreamed for years of meeting her mother, of asking her why. Now, that chance was gone forever. Yet Raphael gently placed a small wooden box in her hands. "Before she died, Isabella left this. She always hoped you would return one day." With trembling fingers, Esperanza opened the box. Inside lay a folded letter, yellowed with age, and a pressed jasmine flower. She unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest child, if you are reading this, it means my prayers have been answered and you have found your way back. Forgive me for leaving you. I was young, afraid, and powerless. But not a day passed that I did not think of you, love you, and pray for you. I trusted that God would guide you to a family who would give you the love I could not. Always remember you were never unwanted. You were always my hope. With all my love. Your mother, Isabella. Esperanza's tears blurred the ink, but in her heart, she felt an unexplainable peace. The answers she had sought were painful, but they were also healing. Her mother had loved her, deeply, fiercely, and in silence. A few days later, Esperanza returned to the church. She knelt before the altar, placing the jasmine flower beside her silver cross. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice steady, "for guiding me back, for showing me that even in loss, there is love." The bells of Saint Mary of the Angels rang above her, echoing through the town as if sealing her journey. She understood now that family was more than blood. It was Ana and Miguel who had raised her with endless love. It was Father Antonio who had blessed her at the very beginning. And it was Isabella who, despite fear and pain, had chosen hope. As she rose to her feet, Esperanza smiled through her tears. She had come full circle, from the church steps where her life began, back to the same place as a woman who now understood her worth. Her story was no longer one of abandonment, but of love, destiny, and faith. What do you think of Esperanza's journey? Do you believe love can heal even the deepest wounds? Share your thoughts in the comments, and remember to like and subscribe so more people can discover stories of hope like this one.